Hi, I'm Naomi, and I guess this story starts on the day my parents gave me an invoice for being their daughter. It was a Sunday, the kind of gray-skied, passive-aggressive morning where no one says anything directly, but everything is just off. I had driven 2 hours from my new apartment to visit them for brunch, something they insisted on calling a family tradition, even though it always felt more like a performance. One where I showed up with wine, compliments, and a cleaned-up version of my life. Miriam, my adoptive mother, handed me a manila envelope before I even took off my coat. No, hi, no, how's work, just, we've been meaning to sit down with you. I laughed, awkwardly. Is this a joke? No, sweetheart, she said. It's just fair. Inside the envelope was a typed, bullet-pointed breakdown: food, rent, gas, clothing, doctor visits, school costs that didn't even make sense. I went to a public high school. At the bottom, bolded, total due, $38,570.26. And beneath that, in italics, we know you can't pay it all at once. Just a gesture of appreciation would go a long way. My fingers curled around the edges of the paper. Don, my adoptive father, just sipped his coffee like it was any other morning, like he hadn't just placed a price tag on my existence. I had to remind myself to breathe. Miriam offered that strained smile, the one she used when she was about to say something cruel but wrap it in soft cotton. We're not trying to pressure you, but you've got a job now, and your sister's trying to get her business off the ground. It would help if you contributed. Of course, my job was real. My money was usable. Sable, their biological daughter, hadn't held a job for more than 6 weeks in her life. But somehow she was always working on something important: a podcast, a candle brand, some subscription box for dogs that never actually launched. She once asked to borrow my laptop and deleted all my graduate work by accident. Didn't apologize, just said, maybe it was for the best. You seemed stressed. That was Sable. And now, this bill. I put it back in the envelope, my face unreadable. Years of practice. When you grow up as the child who was taken in, you learn to perform gratitude before you even know what the word means. I'll think about it, I said. I left before dessert. That night, lying in my bed, the envelope sat unopened beside me. I hadn't even taken my coat off when I got home. I stared at the ceiling, the words echoing. We gave you everything. But had they? Because I remembered the everything. I remembered sharing a room with Sable, but being told I had to clean both beds. I remembered being dropped off at school in the old car while she got the new one, because she needed safe transportation. I remembered getting my first job at 16, while she got an allowance for mental health rest. But I never questioned it, because they said I was lucky. Lucky to be adopted. Lucky to be in a house with a pool. Lucky they didn't send me back to the state. Lucky. That night, I stopped feeling lucky. And I started feeling something else. Something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Suspicion, not rage, not revenge. Not yet. Just that quiet, hair-raising suspicion that maybe I'd been lied to for a long time. Tell me, have you ever been told you're lucky just for surviving someone else's terms? The morning after the invoice, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my caseworker, not because I wanted anything from her, but because I needed to ask a question no one had ever answered directly. Was there ever money set aside for me? Melinda sounded surprised to hear from me. Her voice still had the same warmth I remembered from when I was 12, back when I used to sit in her office on worn vinyl chairs, gripping a cup of orange juice like it was a promise. I'm sorry, she said, after a pause. Can you clarify what you mean? I mean, was there any financial support for my care after I was adopted? From the state or a private trust? Anything that would have gone to Miriam and Dawn for raising me? There was a long silence, clicking in the background. Then her voice changed. Naomi, yes, there was. Actually, there was quite a bit. She went on to explain how, because of my background and the particular agency that handled my case, A trust fund had been created by a church-based endowment. The agreement was simple. Miriam and Don would receive monthly support until I turned 18, and the remaining balance, whatever wasn't spent, would be released to me on my 25th birthday. Except no one had ever told me that, not once. "And that account?" I asked. "Do you know how much is left?" Melinda sighed. "I can't give you exact numbers over the phone, but there should be something substantial, unless there were emergency withdrawals, and those would need to be justified with receipts, which you'd be entitled to see." That phone call shifted something inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the envelope they'd handed me like it was a joke that stopped being funny halfway through the setup. They hadn't just lied. They'd made me feel indebted for being funded. All those years they said I was lucky. All those times they hinted that I cost them everything. And all along, they were being paid. Every meal, every school supply, every coat in winter. It wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. And still, they wanted me to feel like I owed them. I opened my laptop and started searching through my emails, buried folders, years back. That's when I found it. A letter from the adoption agency dated the week of my high school graduation. "Please contact us to update your mailing address for future trust notifications." I'd never responded. Miriam had told me not to worry about pointless paperwork, said she'd handle it. Of course she did. I sat with that realization for hours, not moving. I didn't even eat, just thought. It's funny how long you'll stay in someone's house, mistaking their tolerance for affection, mistaking silence for approval, mistaking debt for duty. By the time the sun had dipped behind the blinds, I had printed everything: emails, public trust documents, and the state notice. I slipped it all into a folder and slid it under my bed. I wasn't ready to use it, not yet, but I needed it close. That week, I didn't return any of Sable's texts. I didn't answer Don's random voicemail asking about my job. I needed space, real space, to figure out what parts of my life were built from love and which were constructed from leverage. And every time I looked at that envelope again, the one asking me for nearly 40 grand just for the sin of being raised, I felt less like a daughter and more like a product they were trying to liquidate. So I started doing something new. I stopped telling them things. No updates, no photos, no shared plans. I didn't pull away all at once. I just became less available, less eager, less involved. And the strangest thing happened. They noticed. They started reaching out more, not warmly, curiously. Miriam left a comment on one of my Instagram photos with a suspicious compliment about how healthy I looked lately. Sable sent a message asking if I still had access to my old credit card because hers got canceled and Mom said yours was in better standing. Like I owed them my credit score too. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. Instead, I booked a quiet meeting with a financial advisor, one who specialized in adoptee trust audits, and I didn't tell anyone because something was shifting. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the slow, careful unraveling of a lie. Have you ever realized someone made you feel like a burden just to cover up their own debts? The strange thing about betrayal is that, at some point, your body starts responding before your mind does. I found myself saying, "I'm good," less often, checking my phone more instinctively, turning the volume down during conversations, because I didn't want to miss anything anymore. They had taught me to be grateful, but they hadn't taught me how to be watchful. That came on its own. The morning after I met with a financial advisor, I walked into my favorite coffee shop, ordered a chai latte, and sat by the window. Not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed a place that wasn't touched by them. A place where no one had ever called me too sensitive or a handful when I cried. I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet, not about money, about patterns. I documented every time Miriam had mentioned bills, tuition, household sacrifices. I made a timeline of every financial favor she'd asked since I got my first paycheck at 19. I mapped out the overlaps, how Sable's emergencies always coincided with big life moments of mine. my first apartment, her car broke down, my job promotion, she got fired and needed help with rent, my birthday, always overshadowed by someone else's family crisis. It looked innocent on the surface, but in a spreadsheet, it became a blueprint. They weren't just bad with money. They were practiced in making their debts feel like mine. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. One afternoon, while going through old paperwork in my closet, I found a folder Miriam had accidentally packed into a box I took with me when I moved out. It was supposed to contain old school awards, but buried in the back, behind a faded math certificate and a report card, was a document I'd never seen. A withdrawal authorization form from my trust, signed by Miriam. The date was 6 weeks before my 18th birthday. The amount, $17,800. The reason, emergency medical care. But I'd never been to the hospital, not once that year. And when I checked the claim ID number with the agency, I found out the bill had been processed by a private clinic, a cosmetic surgery center in Phoenix. Not mine, Sable's. I sat down on the floor, not the couch, the floor, because some truths feel too heavy to process while seated like a person. You need the cold of tile under you. You need gravity to hold the parts of you that your spine can't support anymore. They hadn't just used me, they'd stolen from me twice. First by shaping my identity around debt, then by cashing in on a life that wasn't theirs to manipulate. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd been trained to internalize betrayal, to tuck it inside and turn it into productivity. But not this time. This time, I got up, closed the folder, locked it in my desk, and made a new call. Hi, yes, I'd like to speak to someone about filing a formal audit on a trust mismanagement claim. The woman on the other end sounded startled but professional. She asked me to verify my information. I did, calmly. By the end of the day, a case number was assigned. 2 days later, I changed my bank account. A week after that, I blocked Sable on Venmo and froze the emergency card they still had access to, just in case. Miriam noticed first. She called late one night. Naomi, sweetie, did the bank make a mistake? I couldn't pay the internet bill. It says the backup card is inactive. I lied, said the card had been flagged for fraud. She sighed dramatically. This isn't like you. Are you okay? For once, I answered truthfully. Yes, I'm finally okay. Silence. Then a clipped, all right, well, good night. She hung up. That night, I opened a new Google Doc. I titled it, Inheritance Does Not Equal Indebtedness. It wasn't a revenge plan. It was a reclamation plan. And it started with erasing every lie they'd buried beneath the word family. Ever had to learn that protecting your peace might mean exposing a truth others wanted to stay buried? There was a time when I thought being adopted meant I'd been chosen, that out of all the possible paths I could have taken in life, I'd been selected, wrapped in a safety net, stitched together by love. That illusion cracked quietly at first, but now it was collapsing in full view. The audit request I'd submitted a week earlier was moving forward faster than expected. The woman handling my case, Lana, called with a voice that sounded both kind and exhausted, like she'd walked people through this exact kind of betrayal too many times before. There are several unusual withdrawals, Naomi, she said gently. And based on the guidelines of the original trust, most of them weren't even authorized for non-educational purposes. I'll send you a summary for review, but let's just say it's a pattern. I knew she meant theft. They had spent my inheritance, some from my biological mother, some from a state-run stipend fund allocated for special guardianship, on things I had never even touched: vacations, renovations, Sable's orthodontics, Miriam's eyebrow microblading. And yet they made me feel guilty for every target run. It wasn't rage that settled in my chest that afternoon. It was something colder, still, like standing in the middle of a frozen lake and realizing the ice had cracked long before I'd noticed. I took a walk after the call, Past the high school where I'd taken driver's ed, past the community center where I used to volunteer on weekends, the sidewalks felt smaller now, as if the entire neighborhood had been scaled down by truth. I stopped by the corner store where Don used to buy lottery tickets every Sunday, and I wondered how much of my money had gone into his pockets under the guise of family expenses. Back home, I opened my laptop. This time, I didn't just make a spreadsheet. I wrote a letter, not to them, to their friends, to the board members of the local nonprofit Miriam volunteered for, to the dean of the college Sable had just applied to, a professional documented summary of the trust disbursement violations, carefully worded, fact-checked, and CC'd to my attorney. I wasn't out to ruin reputations for drama. I was making it clear, if they built social capital off me, they could lose it the same way. 3 hours later, I got a call from Miriam. She didn't sound angry. She sounded terrified. "What is this?" she snapped. "You're emailing people? About us?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm emailing people about me and what was taken from me. This is slander, Naomi." "No," I repeated. "It's evidence. You don't understand how this looks." "I understand exactly how it looks. That's why I sent it." She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just went quiet. That brand of quiet that always made me feel like I was the villain. But this time, it didn't work. I was no longer a child hoping for warmth in her voice. I was a woman reclaiming her silence. 2 days later, I got another call. This time, from Sable. "Naomi, please, don't ruin things for us. United States," as if we'd ever been on the same team. She didn't apologize. She just tiptoed around the fire she'd helped start. "I didn't know Mom was using your trust. She never told me. But you never asked either, did you?" I heard her inhale sharply, caught off guard. "Naomi, why are you doing this now?" "Because you all taught me how to stay quiet. Now you're going to learn what happens when I stop." I ended the call without waiting for her response. That evening, I stood in my apartment, watching the sun sink behind the apartment complex across the street. The light fell over my floor like gold spilled from a broken promise. I didn't need revenge that looked like chaos. I needed one that looked like clarity. I opened a new tab. Typed the name of a grant I'd once been denied by a local foundation. At the time, Miriam had convinced me not to apply, said it would look desperate. I was done accepting shame as a substitute for protection. This was mine now, all of it. Have you ever realized too late that the silence you thought was keeping peace was actually just keeping you small? There's a kind of cruelty that doesn't scream. It whispers, smiles, pretends it's doing you a favor while it takes something you didn't even know was yours. That was the kind of cruelty I was raised on. 3 days after the confrontation with Miriam and Sable, I found myself driving aimlessly through neighborhoods that never felt like mine. Though I'd memorized every crack in their sidewalks, my inbox had grown eerily quiet. No new messages from my so-called family, but a few from old teachers, church friends, even a former employer who'd seen my documentation and reached out to say, "If you need a reference, I'm here." That alone told me the narrative was shifting. Still, I wasn't done. I made one last stop. An attorney's office with glass walls and no receptionist. Just a soft chime when the door closed, and a paralegal who greeted me with the kind of respect I wasn't used to receiving in places like that. "Ms. Holloway," she said, "he's ready for you." Inside, my lawyer had already printed and highlighted the trust's original stipulations. The paper was thick in my hand, each line a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. "It's all here," he said calmly, tapping one paragraph with his pen. "This fund is to be used solely for the health, education, and housing of the named beneficiary until she reaches financial independence." Named beneficiary, I repeated, voice hollow. You, not Dawn, not Miriam, not Sable, me. And then came the harder truth. My financial aid had been denied for college because, on paper, I had a trust. But no one had ever told me that trust existed. Miriam had handled the paperwork. Dawn had signed off on the FAFSA. They used it to block opportunities while still controlling the money. I stared down at the folder. How much is left? He didn't look away. About 6,000. Out of over 200,000. Gone. Like it had never existed. My breath didn't catch. My voice didn't break. But my spine straightened, like something in me had decided not to bend anymore. I want to send a final notice, I said. No more calls, no more meetings, just facts, legal, cold. He nodded. And after that, then I billed. The next week, I started working 2 shifts. Not because I had to, because I wanted the time. Time to clear my mind, to ground myself in something other than betrayal. I took a second job at a bookstore. Quiet, clean, no family expectations. Just rows of fiction and fact, paperbacks and purpose. It gave me something none of them ever had. Peace with no strings. There, in the hum of background music and the sound of someone cracking open a new spine, I met Denise. An older woman, widowed, wore black every day like a quiet rebellion against time. You don't speak like someone who grew up safe, she said one night, almost casually. I looked at her. And you don't ask questions unless you already know the answer. She smiled. We started having coffee on Saturdays. She listened more than she talked. But when she did talk, it was always something that cut straight through the noise. One afternoon, she asked, "Do you still talk to them?" I shook my head. They raised you, didn't they? They raised someone, I said. I'm not sure it was me. She leaned back, nodded slowly. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking away. It's accepting that they never saw you to begin with. That stayed with me. Later that week, I started selling some old clothes online. Opened a new savings account, under my own name, at a bank they didn't use. Started drafting my own small business plan, a digital planner brand, tailored for young women navigating financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I didn't know if it would succeed, but I knew it would be mine. And for the first time, that was enough. Then, like clockwork, they came back. First a letter, handwritten, from Miriam. Naomi, families have their rough patches. I know you're upset, but we can fix this. I've spoken to the church about starting a scholarship fund in your name. Let's talk soon. Love, Mom. Not your mother, not I'm sorry. Just damage control, dressed up in cursive. Then came Don. He showed up at the bookstore, didn't even buy anything, just stood there, mouth pressed into a line, hands stuffed into pockets. Your mother's been crying. She's not my mother, I said. He blinked. Naomi, this isn't like you. I think that's the part you're struggling with. I'm finally becoming me. He didn't argue. He just looked tired, and I didn't care, because the moment I walked away from that conversation without shaking, without second-guessing myself, I realized something powerful. They didn't expect me to heal. They expected me to stay loyal to a lie, but I wasn't their investment anymore. I was my own return. Have you ever realized the people who claimed to save you were just spending you instead? It was a Thursday afternoon, when everything quietly tipped into place. The day didn't announce itself with drama or fire. There was no explosive reveal or bitter phone call, just the soft, deliberate unraveling of a world Naomi had once bent herself backward to belong to. She had just returned from a speaking engagement, her second this month, where she'd been invited to talk about her journey as a self-built strategist in the educational nonprofit sector. The invitation came not because she had begged for visibility, but because someone had watched her quietly reroute her life after years of being boxed in. They'd said, "We want your voice. The way you speak cuts through noise." And for the first time, Naomi didn't flinch at being seen. She placed her bag on the counter, unwrapped the silk scarf around her neck, and hung it by the door. The apartment was still, not quiet in an empty sense, but in the way peaceful places sound when no one's trying to prove anything. On the credenza sat a small velvet pouch, unassuming, soft, but dense with memory. She didn't have to open it to know what was inside. A week earlier, it had been hidden in the attic crawl space of her family's old house. Technically, still her name on the deed. Her father's name had been there first, before they quietly transferred ownership to her adoptive mother and restructured finances in a way that made it all look legal. But they'd overlooked something: the old cedar trunk. Inside it, beneath yellowing documents and photos from a life she had once wanted so badly to be part of, sat the heirloom necklace, a single teardrop pearl hung from a gold chain, surrounded by a delicate crown of thorns design. Naomi had last seen it at her high school graduation. Caroline had worn it that day, claiming it was a legacy piece for deserving women in the family. It hadn't been offered to Naomi. She had stood beside Brielle, who'd been given a charm bracelet and a car, while Naomi received a soft "congratulations" and an obligation to help clean up the after-party. That day, Naomi had swallowed her disappointment like a pill. No water, no complaint. Now, she stood in her apartment, holding the velvet pouch in one hand and her phone in the other. She snapped a photo of herself, not a selfie, not posed, just her reflection in the mirror, wearing the necklace. No caption, no tag. But the image spoke. It posted automatically to her private LinkedIn, where hundreds of old family friends and distant relatives still lingered. Within an hour, the photo was viewed over 900 times. Someone commented, "Beautiful heirloom. Looks powerful on you." That was the point. Let them see what they'd tried to hoard. Let them realize it no longer belonged to them. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, missed calls. Not from Caroline, not from Brielle, but from Tasha, the only one in the family who had cracked a window open in that sealed house. Tasha's message was short. They saw the photo. Caroline's furious. Brielle cried. Naomi stared at it, sipped her coffee, and didn't respond. She had a meeting to prepare for. A private board presentation for an educational grant proposal, where she was now the lead architect. As she stood in front of the panel, outlining community metrics and impact analysis, her voice held no trace of the girl who once choked on apologies in her own home. She wasn't fueled by spite. She wasn't performing revenge. She was presenting a life that had been earned in full. After the meeting, she walked out into the spring air and noticed an unfamiliar number calling again. She let it ring. The fourth call in 2 days. They'd get the message eventually. But it wasn't just phone calls. Later that evening, she received a letter, handwritten. The envelope was cream-colored, no return address. The handwriting, Caroline's. Naomi sat with it for a full hour before opening it, not because she feared what it said, but because she wanted to be absolutely certain her reaction wasn't driven by old wounds, but present clarity. Inside, Caroline's letter was exactly as expected, a polite blend of veiled judgment and strategic sorrow. "It's deeply troubling to see you flaunting something that belongs to our shared history. I raised you as my own, Naomi. I gave you a roof, guidance, and every opportunity I could. I won't pretend things were perfect, but dragging family pain into public display is beneath you." She folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer she used for expired coupons and mismatched socks. Caroline's version of parenting had always come with terms and conditions. Naomi's silence wasn't agreement anymore. It was protection from being pulled back into the illusion that gratitude should look like obedience. 3 days later, she attended a conference panel on wealth disparity and access in higher education. During a break, she stepped into the lounge area, still wearing the necklace. Across the room, she saw him, Malik, a former family acquaintance who used to join them for summer holidays, back when the family was still pretending they accepted her. He walked over, hesitating. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said. "You look like yourself, like the version of you no one ever let show up." She nodded. "Maybe that's because I stopped asking permission." He gestured to the necklace. "Didn't Caroline say that piece was irreplaceable?" "She was right," Naomi said, steady. "She just didn't know who it was irreplaceable to." Malik smiled slowly. "They're talking, you know. Everyone's acting like they didn't know what was happening. They always know, she said. They just don't say it until they have someone else to blame. Later that night, she lay in bed with her laptop open. She'd been finalizing a pitch deck for her next project, an educational pipeline initiative that would partner with smaller schools in underserved areas, offering access to mentorship, scholarships, and legal aid for students navigating systems stacked against them. She titled the program, Legacy Reclaimed. The funding application required a personal statement. She typed, "I used to believe legacy was what others handed you, but I've learned it's what you build from what they tried to take. My story isn't about bitterness, it's about boundaries. And when you learn the difference, you stop apologizing for making people uncomfortable with your clarity." The necklace still sat on the table beside her, glinting slightly under the desk lamp. By the end of the month, the fallout was undeniable. The trust fund documentation Naomi had quietly requested through her lawyer revealed something deeply telling. A large portion of the money Caroline claimed to have sacrificed for her upbringing had in fact come from a monthly disbursement held in Naomi's name, set up by a distant aunt who had passed years ago. Caroline had received over $4,000 a month for 12 years. None of that had gone toward college, toward clothes, toward Naomi's name. They had used it for vacations, renovations, Brielle's private dance school. Naomi didn't go public with the information. She just sent a printout of the bank summary to the family accountant with a quiet note, "Please reallocate what was taken into the education fund I've established. No signature needed, just do the math." No reply came, but a week later, the deposit showed up in her nonprofit's account. Quiet, efficient, guilt, when cornered, moved fast. At her next panel, someone asked, "What would you say to women who feel stuck, obligated to keep family peace at the cost of their own?" Naomi answered without blinking, "I'd tell them this: silence isn't the same as peace. One protects, the other pacifies. You don't owe loyalty to people who see your value only in what you give up. You owe it to yourself to live in rooms where your voice doesn't echo alone." There were tears in the room, but none of them were Naomi's. Sometimes, family doesn't break you with fists, it breaks you with expectations. I spent years believing I owed my worth to people who raised me with conditions. But healing came when I stopped chasing approval and started reclaiming what was mine: my voice, my choices, my peace. If you've ever been made to feel like gratitude means silence, I hope this story reminds you otherwise. Have you ever had to choose dignity over obligation? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. And if this story touched something in you, subscribe for more journeys that speak where silence used to be.